The loudest, the biggest, the brashest. New York is its own character in every play.
Bad thing about New York is the pressure. You're always under pressure.
Here are the stories about those plays. It's New York Accent with Damon Amendolara.
Welcome inside the latest episode of New York Accent, everybody. I'm DA, Damon Amendolara, and our guests have spanned the realm of baseball and football, basketball, hockey, everything in between, soccer, that has taken place in New York, and some that have grown up in New York. And our next guest is truly a fan favorite. He played such a small sample size of games for the New York Mets back in the mid-'70s, and yet he's so fondly remembered. He still comes back for alumni events. He was there at the opening of Citi Field. He has been at all types of reunions, and I think fans still really enjoy the story of his rise to such interesting celebrity in the 1973 season when the New York Mets won the National League pennant. Joining us here on New York Accent is George Theodore, best known as the Stork. George, how are you?
Just fine, and thanks for having me. And I'd like to thank all the New York fans for still remembering me.
You know, one of the fans, I was reading a thread of fans of yours, and they said the back of your baseball card says he loves marshmallow milkshakes. I want to know if that's correct, factually incorrect, and if it's correct, where do you get a marshmallow milkshake?
That is correct at one point. Now they're too rich for me.
Okay.
Yeah, you can get it just about any place, from Arctic Circle to Dairy Queen. So all of that. Anyway, that was part of the things that were, when I initially signed a contract, they gave us a questionnaire. And I thought, oh, this is fun. I'll just write all these different things. And I didn't realize they're going to follow me throughout my whole career.
You grew up in Utah, and at that time, when you were growing up in the 1950s, there was nearly no baseball players, major leaguers, that had ever come out of Utah. When you were being scouted, was it unique and rare for Major League Baseball scouts to make it out to Utah?
Very rare. And we did have, like, Herman Franks is from Utah, Fred Sanford. And they were prominent major leaguers at one point. But not many people get signed out of Utah. And so in 1969, when the Mets drafted me, Tom Kilgore, our third baseman at the University of Utah, and a pitcher, Von Oplis from West High School, that was very unusual. So Roy Partee was the scout, and I guess he'd followed us a little bit, but I don't know why, but very rarely did people from Utah sign.
I love the story about when you were drafted. You didn't know you were drafted. This was back in the day where it wasn't like you had a text on your phone or somebody, GM calls you up, or you could read it on the internet or watch it on TV. You had no idea. A month went past the draft and you still had no idea you were drafted. How surprising was it when you finally got that phone call?
Well, I didn't think it was real. And so finally, and I had heard that I was drafted, and I'm saying, well, what's next? And a bird dog scout from northern Utah called me and said, are you interested in signing? And I says, well, sure I am. I'm ready. I'm ready to go. He says, well, what will it take to sign you? And I said, oh, well, I hadn't thought about that. How about $3,000? That'll pay for my year in graduate school if I don't make it. And so he said, okay. And that was that story.
Quite a different world. Hard to imagine a player getting drafted today and not knowing until 30 days later that it actually happened. So you come from Utah and you're drafted into the Mets organization. Was it at all intimidating thinking about going to New York to begin your career, which is such a totally different world than where you grew up and knew?
Well, you know, the Mets were doormats at that time. And that was the year of the amazing Mets that became, world champions. And so I really didn't see things in perspective like that. I just said, boy, this is a chance to play professional baseball, to do some traveling, to go around. And I'm just excited at the opportunity.
Story after story, anecdote after anecdote of fans note how kind you were to them if they asked for an autograph, or if they saw you in the street and wanted to say hello, or they were kids flagging down your car as you left Shea Stadium. Why was it that you had so much patience for everybody and everybody had such a good experience meeting you?
For me, it was kind of natural. I enjoyed the limelight. I enjoyed meeting with people and sign an autograph or so. I like to sign autographs, and it was actually a release. The pressure of playing baseball and competing is so intense that just that human interaction and the autograph signing and pictures, I think to me it was actually a release too.
That's so interesting. Now, you were known as the Stork. You stood 6'3", and at that time, I mean, that's incredibly tall for a Major League Baseball player. People still say it to this day to you. Do you embrace the nickname? Do you like the nickname?
Well, first of all, 6'5" when I started.
Oh, 6'5", okay.
3 now.
I shortchanged you 2 inches.
I got the nickname from Jim Gosker when we were teammates in Tidewater. And I say the story. He saw me holding a baby and he says, there's the Stork. Now, that's not true. But for some reason, some people were calling me the Crane or the Big Bird or so. And he stuck me with the Stork. And it was endearing and people related to it. And so, yeah, affectionately, I enjoyed it. And to this day, that's me.
Your personality is eccentric, and you always had these great quotes, these colorful quotes to the media. And some have thought that you were the inspiration for Kramer, the infamously eccentric character from Seinfeld. Any truth to that?
No, but I relate to him.
You do.
I enjoy watching him.
So when you watch Seinfeld, you see some of yourself in Kramer?
Well, sort of. Let's just put it that way.
What parts can you relate to when it comes to Kramer?
Well, I don't know. He's just exuberant and bubbling and bumbling and spontaneous. So things like that.
I think at the time when you were playing for the Mets, 73, 74, it might have been a different era where an athlete's quotes aren't taken so seriously as maybe they are today, or maybe go in the opposite direction where today, because of social media, so many athletes say so much more that more is accepted. But when you had an outside of the box personality back in the 70s, did you find resistance to it, or did you find that people had a lot of fun with it?
I found a lot of fun, and found certain sports writers and media who had fun and saw baseball as a game and not really a profession that you had to be so intense, such as Maury Allen of the Post. He always was great to me. And Dick Schaap, too, was great. And so they kind of had fun, and I had fun with them. And, it was a lot different era. And sports writers, I know there was one sports writer, Ed Kranepool, told me, he said, kind of stay away from him. He's kind of tough on all of us. And but most of them were really positive and just getting their story.
You were part of the 73 Mets, which are celebrating the 50th anniversary this year, going to the World Series, ultimately losing to that dynasty of the Oakland A's that won 3 in a row. But when you were there, you were learning from Willie Mays. You were also learning from Yogi Berra, the manager. And I read that your only regret is that you didn't have more time with those legends of the game. What was it like to siphon off a little bit of information or be around them, even for such a short amount of time?
Well, that's exactly right. I'm around some of the giants of the game, and I would have liked to pick their brains and find out how they did things and what they were thinking, and because I was so intent on doing my part, making an impression so that I could stay around. That Rusty Staub, for instance, had a book on all the pitchers and that. I didn't do anything like that. I saw the ball and swung at it. Willie Mays was brilliant in the field. He knew the hitters. He got the signals from second base and shortstop, so he knew the pitches and knew which way to go. Yogi Berra was such a tremendous clutch hitter. I'd like to have known, what was going through his mind. And Ralph Kiner, what a wonderful story he would have been to learn how, this great home run hitter, how he did it and what he thought of the current players and things. So that's the kind of the regrets I had. But, when you're in the middle of playing and fighting for a position and fighting to stay around, you don't get to see that historical perspective.
Yogi has all these Yogiisms that make him seem like he's a Yoda-like figure. And yet I'm guessing there was a very pragmatic, sensible, logical part of Yogi Berra that we didn't see because we only read the crazy quotes. What was he like as just a baseball X's and O's guy?
Well, I didn't have much interaction with him specifically. He was a good manager for me in the sense that he didn't put extra pressure on you. He put you out there in your position and kind of expected you to do what you were trained to do. But he had some good people around him that helped him when to change pitchers and when to, pinch hit and things like that. For a young player like me, even though he was good for not putting pressure on me, he was also brought up with the Casey Stengel idea of platooning. And for young players, platooning is kind of tough. We need to play quite often to maintain our sharpness and our reflexes. And so I've gotten to appreciate Yogi more after I've left baseball.
On July the 7th of 73, you suffered a serious injury. So we're almost exactly at the 50-year anniversary of this. And you collided the outfield with a teammate chasing a fly ball. And both of you are down on the ground. A hush comes over the crowd. You end up injuring your hip badly, and it takes you out for the rest of the regular season and almost the entirety of the postseason as well. When that happens and your dream is kind of dashed in the middle of what will be a great season, are you feeling sorry for yourself? Are you bummed out? Are you depressed? Or how do emotionally you handle something like that?
Well, I was happy to be out of pain because having a dislocated hip was the most intense pain you could go through. And they couldn't give me any pain or anything for 4 hours until they got me to the hospital because they didn't know if they were going to operate. But I wasn't thinking of anything like that. I know a doctor here in Salt Lake said, "Oh, I see those dislocated hips all the time on the ski slopes," and I just put them in right there, and that's basically what they did. Finally for me, but I didn't realize that, I was in the hospital in traction for a month and then on crutches for a month. So I came back the 1st of September, and the Mets graciously kept me on their roster and that. But I didn't realize at the time it would really had kind of restricted my movements. And so I didn't quite have the torque of a swing that I used to have. And so, yeah, kind of sad because it really changed my life and changed my baseball career.
Yeah, unfortunately, you were out of the game a couple of years later, although you were with the Mets throughout the 73 postseason run, which included the iconic dust-up between Buddy Harrelson and Pete Rose at Shea in the NLCS. Take me through that confrontation, because those are two guys that will not back down to anyone.
Well, that's true. You know, we were beating Cincinnati, and I think they were a little down. And Pete Rose is such a competitor. You know, he's going to try to do anything to fire things up. And so when he tried to break up a double play and slid into Buddy, Buddy took offense, and he's a little hot-headed as well. And so they had words, and of course, Pete grabbed him and pulled him down, and then both benches emptied, and of course I was out there too, grabbing an opposing player. That's what you're supposed to do in a fight: grab some the other team and just wait. And usually they're not terrible fights. And of course, this was not much of anything until all of a sudden Pedro Borbon comes out of left field and blindsides Buzz Capra, hits him right in the head, and then it started again. And so it was, it fired him up, and Pete got him going, and they ended up winning a game, the next game, I think. And but our pitching held up, and their pitching was not as good as ours, and so we beat them in the National League pennant.
105 games played between 73 and 74 for you. That's not a lot of games, and yet you've always talked about how the Mets have welcomed you back into the family, invited you back to New York for events and alumni events. Were you back for Old Timers Day at City last summer?
Last summer, no. I was invited, but I've been having some eye problems, and so I couldn't make it back last summer. And so I was kind of hoping there'd be a reunion this year, but apparently it was so spectacular last year that was the thing. So now they've just been inviting a couple of players back at a time, and they did with me and Benny Agbiani a few years ago. So I've definitely had my share of coming back and been treated royally. So.
And that's meant a lot. What does it say about the Mets organization that you could play only 105 games for them, and yet they still consider you family?
Well, I'm just so happy and thankful. And from Lorraine and Tim Hamilton there in public promotions, they always looked out for me and included me when they could. And so, yeah, it's kind of a dream.
You went on to work as a guidance counselor in Utah, your native state, for nearly 4 decades, and were recently named the Educator of the Year by the South Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce. And you helped contribute to a book named A Bitter Cup of Coffee: How MLB and the Players Association Threw 874 Retirees a Curveball. That's with author Douglas Gladstone. And this is about how before modern era and new collective bargaining agreements, you guys were kind of out on your own if you did not play more than 3 or 4 years of service time. And so what did you expect might be your pension, and what was the reality for Major League Baseball?
I had no expectations. You know, Marvin Miller was hired in the 60s to be the head of our union, and he really revolutionized things and said, got things that we deserved that we hadn't before. And myself playing, I wasn't thinking about that. I knew that it took 4 years of time to get a pension, and I only had 2, but I know Marvin Miller regretted one thing in the 1980 collective bargaining agreement, And that's that he didn't bring those players previous up into include them in the current agreement. And so, the current agreement was, I think you had to have, instead of 4 years, 38 days to get a pension, and 1 day in the majors to qualify for the medical program, something like that. And so it would have been nice to be included in the pension. There would have been a lot of money, and Major League Baseball, about 35 years later, recognized that they wanted to help all of us players with less than 4 years experience. And I think at one point there was over 1,000, and now it's down to 400 or less. And so they gave us an annuity. Now, annuity, it's great. We get a few dollars every year. However, it's not like a pension that you can pass on to, say, your wife or family or so. But I'm happy to receive that too, that they didn't have to do that, but ethically, it was the right thing to do.
And so it sounds like you felt, and maybe other players alongside you, that along the way there should have been done more from Major League Baseball. Have you run into frustration that baseball has not recognized you guys and what you put in more than they have?
Well, I just accepted the rules at the time, and didn't even think twice until Doug Gladstone did his research and said, hey, this isn't right. And he's the crusader who really got all of us pre-80 players, into the fold at least. And so, it was something that I wasn't really aware of the politics or the collective bargaining, those kinds of things from the establishment. So all of this is kind of new to me.
The title of the book, A Bitter Cup of Coffee. It doesn't sound like there's much bitterness in your voice, no matter what we talk about, the brevity of your career, the injury, and now the pension. But do you have any bitterness?
Not really. I had so many wonderful experiences, and that I feel blessed in many ways. But I know there's 3 players that I know of here in Salt Lake in the same boat as myself. And I know of 3 other players who have since passed away. And so, you look at some of the salaries now, and probably one of the biggest salaries, like a judge's salary, could pay for doubling our annuity for all 400 of us. So I don't know where they're getting all the money, but it's really incredible.
It sure is. When you played, you seem like a pretty grounded, down-to-earth guy that never thought of yourself as a, quote, baseball player that was a celebrity. So besides Willie and besides Yogi, who were you in awe to meet or to face when you played Major League Baseball?
Well, I don't know if I really had anybody in awe. I'd love to watch the Pittsburgh Pirates take batting practice. Boy, and the Cincinnati Reds and their big red machine. That was absolutely wonderful. But let me tell you one story about Bill Buckner. Bill Buckner came up with several of those Dodgers at the same time, from Russell and Lopes and Garvey and Bobby Valentine. And here I had got a single, and there was a man on second too. So I was on first and the man on second, and Bill Buckner was the first baseman, and he's playing behind me. And he was a great player. He was a great fielder and really a wonderful hitter too. But I'm leading off, and here's Buckner right behind me saying, hey, batter, hey, batter, hey, batter, hey. And I'm thinking, this guy's as loose as can be and relaxed. And that's my main memory of Bill Buckner. So
Was it hard to hit it Shea with the planes roaring overhead?
I kind of tuned them out, and so that wasn't necessarily bothering me. But what was hardest was the whirling winds and that, and knowing how they could play havoc with the ball, and to be able to, my main position was first base, but I had to learn to play outfield, and so being out there in the outfield with those swirling winds and trying to judge what's going to happen, that was a real adventure.
You are tall, so you stand out. It's the 70s in New York. You're a Major League Baseball player. Did you ever hit the clubs, discotheques, a Studio 54, something like that?
No, I was not into that scene at all.
So there was a whole different world of the New York 1970s going on, and you were like, that is not my world.
Well, it wasn't that it wasn't my world. It's just that I hadn't become a part of it yet. And Dick Schaap did a story on me, and he took me into Harlem, into a nightclub there, and we were watching it. And that was the closest I came to a nightclub or so.
How does the experience of the Stork going to a nightclub in Harlem in the 70s go down? Is there any funny stories out of that night?
Well, I don't know. I just felt natural and kind of fun. Enjoyed the show and enjoyed the people around. And of course, Dick Schaap was always fun to be with.
He was a good host, huh? He was a good host, not only on TV or in front of the camera, but also in genuine, just everyday life.
Tremendous. And I was so sad when I found out he had passed away, I guess from an infection after getting hip surgery or something.
Yeah, he was a legend. Well, George Theodore stands out for being such a memorable member of the New York Mets of the 1970s, a member of that 1973 National League pennant-winning Mets squad. And as I mentioned before, it's an interesting read, the book about the number of baseball retirees that are right now getting thrown a curve by Major League Baseball. It's called A Bitter Cup of Coffee, how MLB and the Players Association threw 874 retirees a curveball, by Douglas Gladstone, the author. George Theodore, our guest here on the show. George, this was so much fun. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoy New York Accent, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more episodes like this one. Also, if you want to watch more episodes of New York Accent, check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you for the next episode of New York Accent.